Hello, Changemaker,
Welcome to the Innovation Room.
a place for business leaders,
Change agents and change champions.
anyone who wants to know where digital transformation is taking us,
A place that sparks ideas.
and explores what's really possible with software and technology.
Ready?
Let's see what's happening.
When you change a strategy, you create a void between now and next, a shift that usually is not so easy to navigate for the organization. You must have heard that culture can make an organization thrive in liminal spaces, the chaotic, unclear spaces created as a result of a shift. I'm exploring this with my guest today, how culture can support the strategies that are increasingly needed to be agile and fluid due to the changes happening around us, caused by us, or imposed on us. My guest today is a self-proclaimed freaky, or a geek, who has seamlessly blended the roles of a corporate culture curator, academic, and an author into his fascinating career. Daniel Strode is the Global Director of Culture and Strategy at Banco Santander. He manages the Santander Way, a culture spanning 32 countries and influencing over 200,000 colleagues. I am Somayeh, CEO of Geeks. Please join me in the Innovation Room to hear from Daniel Strode, an exceptional figure shaping culture and innovation in our times. Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining me in the Innovation Room. Do we start with your introduction?
Hi to you, and thanks for having me indeed. So let me introduce myself. I'm Daniel Strode. I would say quite not a unique person, but a unusual person, perhaps, is a kind way of putting it. So
Our kind of person. Go on.
kind of person, exactly. Definitely what we would call here in Spain a freaky, which is a equivalent of a geek for sure. And I say that because I do three things really. The first is I practice human resources. So I'm an HR practitioner at Banco Santander, one of the world's biggest banks. And I look after the corporate culture, and I'm the custodian of what we do in culture there. But also, I'm an academic at heart as well. So I'm a teacher in various universities, and I really love and cherish that kind of work because I get exposed to new ideas, new companies, new students all of the time, and it's really wonderful. And then the third pillar, which just makes me extremely unusual, is I took both of these experiences and turned them into a book and became an author very recently, just a few months ago. And that was indeed a labor of love.
Cool, brilliant. So what do you teach?
So my main teaching is around topics of human resources, but specifically around how do you create cultures of innovation and what makes an innovative company. So I tend to go into depth on a few different modules and a few different things there, looking at not only HR processes and best practices and policies, but then the cultural aspects of how should a company be, what should the leadership be doing, those kind of things. So really quite broad, but we go into depth, spend a lot of time on each of those facets.
Brilliant. I got to know you through your book when I was going to Paris, and in the airport I love to pick up books, and most of the time the kind of books in the airport are not that exciting. But I managed to get your book, and it was very, very interesting, very practical, which I think your background, now that you explain it, would kind of give me an idea of why it was so practical. So we get to discuss some of the things that you said in your book. I think that would be really useful. But before we carry on, as our tradition, do you wanna share with us who would you bring to the Innovation Room with you, dead or alive, fiction or real? And it can be more than one person. Recently, I've been asked multiple times, "Oh, can I have more than one person?" I'm like, "Sure, you can."
It's a really, really great question, and a very difficult question to answer because actually in my life I have so many inspirations and inspirational people around me. I would love to bring Elon Musk into an innovation room with me.
Controversial, but
Not because I necessarily like him or enjoy what he does or how he does. I just want to understand why does he do the things that he does. So that would be the first person, because I'm interested in the motivations and the reasons why he behaves in certain ways. As I say, definitely controversial and definitely not an endorsement of his management methods. And then because I'm allowed more than one person, I would go for another one. And I would go with someone probably no one has heard of. And it's a person called Eric Calderon. He started a company called Art Blocks, which is a Web3 company looking at generative art that lives on the blockchain. And I just want to tap into his brain so much because he's a fascinating fellow. He's doing something that's at the cutting edge of technology. And the interesting thing is, he started this company, which has become wildly successful over the last few years. But prior to that, he was selling and manufacturing ceramics. So I want to understand, what did he learn from that business? And how did he bring that into a digital environment? So that would be an interesting dinner conversation for myself.
Maybe we should bring him on the podcast and do a roundtable.
It would be fantastic if so.
Brilliant. So you know our current series Shapeshifters. It's all about, in the world that is changing so much and so fast, when the ground beneath you as a business is shifting, your strategy is what is going to keep you poised, keep your business successful. And the challenge is, how do you even define and update your strategy when the environment around you is changing dramatically? One part of that is obviously how, if you are changing your strategy, if you are having to update your strategy, what is the best way to communicate that with people? And I think that's where your expertise comes in massively, in terms of, it's a big drive of the changes in the business world and in the world is technology, and technology in nature, software technology changes very fast. It used to change very fast anyway, but when I say as the technology moves fast, it means like I'm uncomfortable with the pace it's changing. So how do you, if we start with the point of, we all have heard culture eat a strategy for breakfast. So if we don't want that to happen, if we want the culture to work with a strategy, if we want them to be effective, what is your view and advice, or even observation around that?
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with, how do you avoid culture eating strategy, because probably that's not an optimal solution. So I understand the sentiment is that culture is perhaps more important or critical to a strategy's success. But one of the things I see in companies is everybody talks about digital transformation and the pace of change and so on, and people are scared of digital and scared of technology. But the truth is, digital transformation, as scary as it sounds, is really just business transformation. And that's what we need to know. This is what we need to understand. We need to understand the world is changing, things are moving, and your strategies do have to change and adapt. And I think COVID was perhaps a good example to all of us of that, and one where we all have a recent memory or a muscle memory around. And the key there, if we look back, what did we learn was we did have to adapt, and we had to communicate and double down on those communications. So I saw the best CEOs and leaders doing 2, 3, 4 times more communications during those periods. And they were explaining the new strategy or the changing strategy, but they were also explaining the fact that we needed to be ready for change. We needed to be resilient. We needed to be willing to adapt, because if we didn't, we wouldn't survive. And I think when you go to employees and you share those messages up front and in a very honest way, I think that can help you succeed.
Did you notice any change in the way the communication is happening in the business, from leadership to the rest of the business, but also from the other way, considering we don't have the fixed environment that we used to have?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the interesting things for me was we started to see great leaders communicating faster and in a more friendly manner, I would say. So typically what you've seen chief executives of companies have 3 video cameras recording them. They don't make any mistakes because they've probably done 10 different takes.
Polished
Yeah.
way of
Really polished, a beautiful backdrop. And we saw those go out of the window, and we saw the real authentic leaders just filming selfie videos from their mobile phones and then publishing them to the organization. And I think they landed really well because it was much closer to the employees. And I think that was a real big change for most people. And it would be a change I would hope would now stick and would now last, because actually people do want those kind of faster, more informal connections, because actually in many cases we've lost the more formal elements of the workplace now as well.
And have you noticed anything around, because you mentioned it's become faster. We used to have the quarterly updates, the annual strategy update to the business, and maybe like a monthly kind of town hall kind of meetings to just reconnect everybody to the plan. Have you seen that changing, and what would be, from your views, what would be the frequency in which the businesses should communicate their strategy if everything is changing so fast?
So I think when it comes to the pace of change, the frequency of communication, there is a fine line to tread here. What you don't want to have is too much communication, which would mean a communications campaign that overloads or bombards the employees, because I think we also need to be mindful of their mental well-being, the resilience in the workplace, those kind of topics. But if the leader comes out and says, the world is changing, which means our strategy will need to adapt. I don't have all of the answers today, but maybe in a month I'll have the answers. But what I can tell you is I have a vision, and this is the vision. Then I think that's something that's quite acceptable and well received by employees. I think the role of the leader in these changing times is not necessarily to have the answers, and that's very important. But more important is to have the vision and the strategy and the direction of travel, to say, okay, this is where we're going. I may not know how we're going to get there, and you as my team need to help me go in that direction, but this is the direction, and have that certainty and clarity. And I think that's always something well received and helps make sure we don't cross that line of just over communication, bombarding of people, because the vision probably shouldn't change too frequently, even if the strategy does need to adapt.
Yeah, I agree. The vision normally won't change that much especially if it's an infinite vision. It would still stand the time. But as a strategy changes, you mentioned some nice practical things in your book, and also when we chatted before about when we are not in the hybrid kind of world, and when you have remote employees, and then you have some people in the office, some people sometimes in the office, and whatnot. How best to communicate the change in the strategy to everybody, and how to foster that collaboration that is required for successful implementation of a strategy, especially when it changes so often?
I think basically what you've got to do is what we call in Spain the fine rain effect. And it means you just constantly do lots and lots of activities and actions in this space, because what you typically tend to see is one channel of communication or one message will land with 20% of the people, which means you need to do that 5 different ways to land with 100% of the people. And that's okay. That's the reality of the situation. And I think that's been made more complex, as you say, by this hybrid way of working now, where we do have either fully remote teams, geographically dispersed teams multi-located in different locations, teams coming in and out of the office in various patterns, all sorts of different ways of working now. And I think what we have to do is be quite deliberate in those messages to make sure we target everyone, and then conscious that we need to create organizations where information can flow between everyone. The worst thing you can do when you have this hybrid workforce is have some workers with all of the information and others with none of the information.
How do you know if that is what is happening in the business? What are the indications, and how can you identify that?
So I guess the indications for me is, what types of technology are people using, and looking at those usage statistics. And I don't mean tracking the employees on any sort of granular basis. Absolutely not. What I mean is Are we recording all of the meetings that we do and publishing them to our SharePoint? Are we taking good minutes or good notes of those meetings and town halls that we have? Are we making sure that when we do on-sites or off-site events, they're accessible to everybody, be that people who already are in the office, be that working parents who have different schedules, whatever that might be. And just being really conscious in those kind of designs of different things, because if we're not conscious about that, then we lose that value of, the accidental innovation or the office workplace and the collaborations that can happen there. And we also need to be really conscious that when people do come to the office, the experience that they have there needs to be designed so that they can meet colleagues face to face rather than do Zoom calls all day long. And one of the
That's
best
the funniest. That's the funniest thing that happens. People are in the office and they are talking in Teams,
and they
and it's
behave
like,
the same way.
why are you in the office if you're using Teams to have a chat?
Exactly. And, one of the best banks in the UK has got a large number of their staff now who come into the office. And when they're in the office, they set an email out of office that says, you can find me on the second floor, come and have a chat. And probably I'm not going to respond to your email because I'm actually in the office and want to do face-to-face things. And that message culturally is very powerful to the organization, which is actually being in the office now is out of the office. And being out of the office is for deep work and deep thinking time and personal reflection. And I think that's important.
Really interesting. What is the role of then the leaders in this changing, or what is the expectation? What's the demand on the leadership in such a changing environment when variables have become too many?
It's very difficult for leaders now. I do appreciate that. But the thing that they must do, in my opinion, probably two things. So one is they need to be the role models of the culture of the company, and they need to do that every single day. So they need to show the behaviors and display the behaviors in everything they do, because employees are watching, and they're especially watching in this hybrid work environment. And there was someone who told me the other day that there's research that proves leaders are being watched 6 times more frequently
What is
just
the
because
reason?
they're a leader.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If that's one of the trends of this hybrid working, why do you think they're being watched more?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, but the main thing for me is employees are looking to them for clues on how to behave and how not to behave, because it's probably still for many people an environment which is quite unsettling. I remember when the pandemic first started, everybody went to remote office, and what I saw was people working extremely long hours. Why were they doing that? Well, they were doing that because they were scared they might lose their jobs. They were scared that they had to prove their level of productivity. They didn't know how to be productive in traditional ways. They thought their output wasn't measured based upon goals and objectives, but rather number of hours that their icon was green on Microsoft Teams, those kind of things. And actually, what we've needed to do as top performing companies is change that behavior so that we're much more focused on what are your deliverables. I don't really care or worry about how you deliver those. Obviously how you deliver is important, but what I mean is I'm not going to be micromanaging.
Within the guidelines, how,
Yeah,
like,
live,
within the
live the values of
flexibility
the
you have.
company,
Yeah.
and within that flexibility. And the key thing is, is everybody working towards a common goal for the company? And that's where it comes back to the strategy thing. So leaders need to embody the culture, but they also need to embody the strategy, because people are looking to them for the clues, but also looking to them for alignment and proving the value. And what I've also noticed is, these engagement surveys that companies do, you often see the high performing companies, so the ones with strong return on tangible equity and profits on the stock market, compared to those with less returns, also have higher levels of employees aligning with the strategy of the company. So they say, I understand the strategy and I know how my work contributes to that. So that means to me, the leaders need to embody the strategy, but also cascade it and make sure people are aligned and knowing how they contribute the value. Otherwise, you get this environment of people just working for work's sake.
You mentioned something really interesting, which we refer to as liminal spaces, the spaces in between. When there is a lot of chaos, a lot of uncertainty, people don't know how to behave. They don't know what to expect, and that's a kind of a space that when you do digital transformation, you will be in, because you're changing systems, you're changing processes, you're changing the way people should work. So it's a bit of unsettling environment because you don't know or what you're expected to do or what you will be able to do your work as is not yet there, and what you used to do is no longer available. So it's and we talk about to our clients, we talk about what's the role of leadership in digital transformation and how they should be the guidance and the almost like a tour guide. You need to just guide people through these liminal spaces, and you need to create what we call liminal spaces culture, which is like no blame, lots of growth mindset, high collaboration, high communication. That's the type of culture you have to create if you want your digital transformation to be successful. But when you were talking, you got me thinking about this hybrid working and this change in the way we work and the strategy change needing to change a lot. That creates liminal spaces. That creates a slightly chaotic, a slightly uncertain environment for people to work in. And we used to have people in the office, or most companies had, where people could just learn how to behave by watching people, by just being around people, which we don't have at the moment. So that's the I think that's the element that is missing, especially for the younger people or new employees. Even if you're experienced, if you're new to the business, it would be very hard to find out what is the culture, right? What is expected of you? How do you present your work? How do you communicate you're doing a great work? And that's unsettling for people. That's nerve wracking a bit. Do you have any practical advice on how to do so if you were like a new person, new employee, first job, or an experienced person in a new position? How would you create that culture of trust? How would you make sure you understand what's the strategy, what's the plan, and what is expected of you?
Yeah, I think onboarding is probably the area that most companies are struggling with, or companies are struggling the most with. And for me, there's two types of company. There's one that just has an onboarding checklist, and the manager rushes through it and ticks off all of the things as quickly as possible. And then there's the second type of company, which is having a checklist, but really going deep into it. So to me, that means assigning a buddy on the first day or a mentor on the first day that you can speak to them even before they join the company, so they can start to understand what are the values, what's the culture, the way of working, all those kind of things. Having somebody who you can ask the silly questions to that's not in your team or in your line management structure is very important as well. But then also, you do need to come and see your colleagues face to face from time to time as well. So I think those activities will never go away. And we have to deliberately design those interactions for companies to have, whether they're on sites or off sites or town halls or whatever they might be, where you can go deep on some of these topics is really important. But everything is underpinned by one of the things you said, which is psychological safety and growth mindset. And I think this also is something which companies struggle with and humans struggle with, because we've gone through school being told we're right or we're wrong. And, the exam structure has always been very black and white. You're either correct because 1 + 1 = 2, or you're wrong because you say 1 + 1 = 3. The problem is, in the work environment, with this digital transformation, with this change, with this flexibility and strategy, that's just not the case and not appropriate. And for companies, we've been putting in place bureaucracy and processes to keep us safe, to move us away from risk, to remove the decision-making power of people, and so on and so forth. But in this world, those things don't necessarily work. So we need the leaders to rewire the organization and create those safe spaces. And, just a couple of things that come to my mind on how can a leader create a psychologically safe environment. I would say two things. One is never rush to give advice. So you're a leader, you don't need to have the answers. Let your people have the time and space to come up with solutions themselves. That's very important. And the second is to have courageous conversations. So talk about a time when you failed, but you learned something new, when you tried something and improved something else because your initial efforts were not successful, and having those really brave and courageous conversations to say this isn't the end of the world is important. And the truth is, when you really think about it, in any business around the world, with the exception of very few things like the medical industry, there's very few actions that someone can take in a workplace which cannot be undone within half an hour anyway, and the consequences put right, and you can apologize to your customer. So really there's no excuse for not being brave, not for taking risks and learning from those as we go along. But the leaders have to create that environment.
Very interesting. Another part of, I think, big factor in innovation and technology is having diversity. And diversity, like statistically, is proven that it creates better solutions. And I think the whole change in after COVID and also with all the technology changes is creating a whole new level of diversity. So diversity is no longer like your typical categoric diversity categories that we all know. Now you have people. Diversity means having people who work in different hours, different places. You see bigger difference or bigger diversity between the people who are parents and those who aren't, those who have pets and those who haven't, and it's a lot more depth to the diversity now that it was ever before. All of that aside, now we have a whole new level of diversity with AI becoming our new employee, our new teammate to work with. So it's taking it to the whole new level of having a diverse team. What are your thoughts and advice on how to take advantage of diversity in a right way, to communicate, to collaborate, and to innovate?
So for me, diversity is business at the end of the day. What you need to have in companies is at least as diverse a workforce as your customer base, because otherwise you really will never understand your customers, who are at the end of the day your most important inputs into your company, because they're the people that buy your products and services, and they're the ones that can make or break your company in terms of the brand and the relationships that they have with their friends and family. So for me, that's the minimum, and diversity is business. But it's exactly as you say, this is no longer about males and females in technology. This is no longer about millennials and baby boomers. This is something much deeper, which is great. This is diversity of opinion, of thought, of beliefs, of experiences. And that's something that companies need to take advantage of. However, it's very, very difficult to do. And I think the best companies are using crowdsourcing to do this. Crowdsourcing technology very well, but this is a technology which can basically take the inputs of hundreds of thousands of people across the globe at any point in time and analyze what people are saying in order to come up with the best solutions. And I've seen companies all the way from Google using this, through to my bank using it, through to all sorts of SMEs using it for different business challenges. And typically what happens is the CEO or leadership team will say, we have this business challenge. How can we solve it? And they might ask their customers, or they might ask their employees, or they might ask their communities or their shareholders, whoever that might be. But let's say employees. And typically, employees will go to a crowdsourcing platform, so a typical Facebook-style platform hosted online. They'll be able to post their responses anonymously to the question, and then the other employees will vote, either like or dislike those comments. And what you see is the top ideas or the best ideas rise to the top of the pile. And then employees can iterate upon those ideas to say, oh, I really like this, so let's go a bit deeper. Here's my solution. Here's what I would do. And typically, giving 2 or 3 weeks for employees to come up with answers to a question and a challenge is plenty of time. And you'll be so shocked and surprised. The ideas are absolute gold. And the reality is, it goes back to my previous point, which is leaders don't need to have all of the answers, because actually the power of people in your company are the ones which can really make the change. And I think we need to harness everyone that works in a company. If I look at my bank, 200,000 employees in 32 countries, you need to harness that diversity because it's such a fantastic resource. So the question is always, how do you do that? And I think crowdsourcing provides a really good technological solution for that.
I think maybe in the bigger, when we're talking about a bigger group, it might be easier because you can use those kind of technologies. But say you have a company of like, I don't know, 200 people, 500 people, and then you have different levels of management and leadership. So if you are, and part of your leadership are in different countries. So if you want to collaborate, if you want to get the best of ideas, and they have different personalities, like you can't just go and post something somewhere and get there. There's not gonna, like, 10 people in the leadership team, they're not gonna trend well. They're too few to trend. So what are those kind of, like, do you have any advice on those kind of collaborations?
Sure. Well, I think in the end, the crowdsourcing can work well in those scenarios because everybody puts their comments in an anonymous format. And that's the interesting thing for me, which is everybody has an equal voice. So one of the challenges that companies face when it comes to innovation or diversity of thought is often it's the most senior person that takes the limelight. And, there's a whole host of different biases when it comes to speaking up.
And influence and everything.
And influence, exactly. Yeah. So sunflower bias would be that one, where everybody looks at the most senior person and says, yes, I'm aligned with that. I may not agree, but I'm aligned with what you've said. And that's the end of the conversation. So it can work really well because of that anonymous nature. But one of the things I tend to provoke or promote within small companies and small teams is whenever you have a meeting or a decision that needs to be made, have the most junior person speak first. And that's very, very important because it gives everybody the opportunity to surface ideas, and it helps you fight against these natural biases and tendencies that we all have just to please the most senior person in the room. And I think also one of the other advantages is the most senior person in the room is also hearing everybody else. And it might be the first time they hear something, so they can learn as well. So I think, yes, you can do crowdsourcing on a scale or even a smaller scale, but you can do some tactical things like having the most junior person speak first. And that's really important too.
Wonderful. And in terms of real examples, is there any organization that you can bring up as good examples of organizations who are actually living this kind of culture and they are utilizing these kind of practices that you mentioned?
Definitely. I think Lego would be one of the most fantastic examples, and I use it not because
we love Lego on this podcast. It comes up all the time.
you know what? I'm gonna show you something here on the screen. Actually, I've got this.
Oh, you do have one.
Yeah, this is the original Lego 1930s duck. That it was a wooden duck originally, and it was one of their first products. But the interesting story around Lego really is, they started in the 1930s as a wooden toy manufacturer, and their focus was entirely upon the customer. So with this wooden duck, there was a father and a son working in a workshop, basically at the bottom of their garden. And one day, the son comes to the father and says, I've saved 30% of our production costs. And the father says, well, how did you do that? And he says, well, I didn't apply a final coat of polish to the products. And the father went absolutely crazy and said, go to the train station, get the pallet of toys back, put the coating on, and then ship them. We are not here to save money. We're here to give the customers excellent service. And of course, that customer service and customer focus made Lego through the 1990s one of the most successful companies ever. But in the end of the 1990s and early 2000s, they nearly went bankrupt and, fell out of favor really in the market. And it was for a number of reasons. It was because they tried to cut costs. So they outsourced much of their manufacturing to third parties. They stopped listening to the customers. They started designing products in isolation, and it was a tough time for them. But then they changed their CEO, and he said, we need to change our strategy and our culture. So our business strategy has to be looking different from what we're doing today. So we're no longer in the building block market, so the children's plastic toy market, but we're competing with the PlayStations, the Sonys, the Xboxes, the Game Boys, all those kind of things. If you don't buy Lego, what does someone buy? And it really wasn't Meccano or Mega Bloks. It was some DVDs or other entertainment product. So he understood that the business was no longer the business of old. So that was the first strategic change. And then the cultural change was, let's really focus back on the customer. So they started a website called Lego Ideas, where anyone around the world can go and put their ideas for new products. They can even design using Lego bricks, different things. And they've brought out really successful products that customers have designed. So it's that co-creation piece once again coming to the fore. I've got the Friends Lego set downstairs in my living room. This was designed by a fan of Lego and is one of their top selling products now. Also, what they did internally in regards to their culture was they said, we're going to bring the manufacturing back in-house. And today they do 99% of their products in-house. And that meant that their manufacturing line was now sitting next to their product development line, which meant the prototyping and iteration could be faster and more rapid than ever before. And that goes back to strategy and communications. How do we test things? How do we communicate with one another? How do we try things and learn from failures? All of those things that we've discussed in the last half an hour became much more important. So I think they're probably one of the companies I would say that is your typical business case study to learn from. And if you learn and you take a couple of the things that they've done and successfully implement in your own company, that would be great.
Wonderful. I can keep talking to you for a good few more hours around the topic, but we try to keep the podcast around half an hour for obvious reasons that people are busy. So as the closing point, what is your last word of advice or words of advice to people around navigating the space between now and the next while they're changing the strategy?
I would say so. My book's called The Culture Advantage, and in there I have 8 different principles of how to drive innovation in your company and how to really set yourself for success. But the thing that I say at the start is to understand that this kind of change is a long process. It's not something that happens overnight. So I think people need to have patience when trying to turn a company around or change its course and direction. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is you don't need to do everything. Just taking a couple of actions is often the best first step. And, as you said really kindly at the start, my book is very practical and it offers hundreds of different things that you can do to improve your culture and become more innovative. But actually, it's like a Chinese restaurant. You don't order everything off the menu, you order what you want. And you can do the same in your companies, depending on your size, on your scale, on your needs, on your customers, whatever that might be. So patience and persistence. Choose a couple of things, go at them continually, and take your time with them as well.
And read Daniel's book.
That would be very kind. If anyone did that, I would love to hear from them as well and make conversations with them, the same as we're doing today.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for giving us the time today, and I think we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for joining us in the Innovation Room.
We hope it sparks some ideas.
Want to learn more about what we do?
Maybe you could even be our next guest.
And spark some ideas yourself.
Find us at Geeks Limited.
And join us again soon.
Because real change never stops.